I was high school graduate, never really went to university, and also was working as a temporary contract worker. I was single, enjoying drinking a lot. But one day I thought, what's going to happen after 10 years? Will I be still having job? And will I be alone? Will I be, So one day I decided to educate myself. I started to take a correspondence college class while I was working full time. And then I switched to night university. Before that, I was always thinking about myself. I was worried about myself, But then after I started and I don't know, I feel like I finally got a space in my heart that allow me to think about something else. So I started to see what's happening in the world, in a society, in a community. Finally, I was promoted to a full-time worker. So I started to get involved in the CSR project, and that really made me think about the issue. I was very lucky to have this opportunity to work for the project called Kids International, that working with a high school student living in the orphanage. It was very difficult for them to think about their future. They just don't believe the adults, or they think there is no future really because they don't have any family or the things like that. So because that was the CSR project, I really started to think what CSR project can do, and this could impact people, life, and the community, really, and the social issues. Right after the project, one of the high school students asked me that she wants to keep studying English. So I think I did like a mentoring with her. I didn't even know the name of the mentoring back then. I gave her a homework and teaching English and talks, how their life are and how my life is. And she got into college. She started to have her own dream that she wanted to work for a travel agency so she could travel over the world. And she also transferred to university. And she did graduate the university, and she got a job in the travel agency. And I saw her, life is changing. She met this project and she met me, and she started to think her potential in herself. Then I thought, wow, really? And because of this project I met, and I decided to do a master degree where I will much more on the CSL project so that I could contribute.
I think thought partnering is such an amazing practice, because I think you can start out with holding the space for another person to talk to you about their ideas, to talk you through their fears, to talk you through their concerns or their anxiety. And you just kind of listen, and you can hear their thoughts, and you can partner back to them and say, well, have you thought about this? Or what do you think about that? And just even that exchange of having a space of somebody who can be a sounding board, like who's on your team and really wants the best for you and just wants to help you move your ideas forward. And I know we often call that coaching, or we call that mentoring. But I think at a very basic level, even without, I think, formal terms or names or certifications, I think thought partnering can be a much more one-on-one, just horizontality of supporting each other in, thinking out loud and developing our ideas about what we want to do for ourselves and how do we get from point A to point B. And I think if you can imagine that young teenage girl didn't have parents to do that thinking with, or to go through that with, or someone who's older, and can give that kind of sense of feedback and who's on their team. And if you did that for 2 years, you were probably one of the most present adults in her life, maybe at that time, really holding space for her.
And then, I learned more than she did.
Isn't that amazing, right? I mean, that's the best part too.
Yes.
Let's zoom in now to the events of 3/11. Maybe talk us through what you were living and experiencing on 3/11, and then your thought process thereafter.
Everyone thought what we can do. So I was one of them. Back then, I already decided to leave company to pursue for my next career. First, I was still working, but I took a day off and went to Ishinomaki in early April to do the volunteer work, and also to be there and see what's really happening. And I was really shocked to see the devastation.
You said you went to Myanmar living conditions, when you were there and seeing it at the grassroots, and then when you went to Ishinomaki for the first time and really saw for your own eyes? Fairly soon into your volunteer work, I mean, you can maybe describe for us how you became involved and how perhaps you ended up building out, I guess, the support services for women in particular, right?
I wanted to do something, but I had no knowledge or no interest in gender or women's issues back then. I just saw the issues, especially for women. So after 3 days, I arrived in a volunteer center. The city and the local women's group decided to start women's support in the evacuation centers. And they invited volunteer group as well. So we started to visit the evacuation centers all together with the city, the local women, and me. And we were all walking, talking together and meeting with the leader of the evacuation centers. The local women decided to have a questionnaire to all the evacuation centers only for the women and personal request. It was 2 months after the triple disaster. I was imagining that there must be all the staff are there and the evacuation centers, but yes, there are a lot of stuff, but especially for women's underwears, there are many, but it's not their size so that they can really use, and of course there are many kind of products they needed, but it was very difficult to them to speak up.
And it's hard. We sort of take, I think, for granted. And there's, increasingly different organizations around the world that are speaking up about, period shame and menstrual supports and making sure, New Zealand has decided to have feminine hygiene products and menstrual products available in schools, because sometimes even in New Zealand, which is such an advanced country, but I guess there's challenges around, do girls stay home from school and absent themselves because of shame or concerns around period shame? And so, if you can imagine in a post-disaster context, you're in an evacuation center and your choice is to go up to any of the men who are the heads of the evacuation center or the leaders of the evacuation center, who pretty much are all men across, when we look at the research on what the reality was, evacuation leadership, there really was just an absence, right, of not enough women in those roles, or even in public facing, service roles, so that women could say, well, I don't really want to have to talk about these private things to the head of the evacuation center. And then what do you do in the absence of having another way to solve that? And certainly from the research I've done on women parliamentarians, women citizens are more likely to go approach an elected official when it's a woman, because they think that elected woman is a little bit closer to their reality. And if there's issues that are sensitive around their reality that they're worried a man might not empathize with, if it's a man who's an elected official, who's their representative for parliament, they may not go. But we do see a propensity of women to feel a little bit more comfortable to go talk about those issues with a woman elected representative. So we see that at the highest levels for national politics and also to local politics. So of course, in an evacuation center, having your needs, being able to voice your reality and your needs, and thinking that the person on the other side will be empathetic and will be supportive and will hear your concerns and understand them, is such an important piece of psychological safety. You later then took on the role of representative director and became the one leading the organization and building that forward with all the responsibility that entails. And you were so passionate about build this new, exciting grassroots academies program to help train and raise up the young women leaders in Tohoku.
I think the network that they got to know each other, that they are not alone and they can ask for help and they can talk if they have difficulties. They can just say weak things. Sometimes you're defeated and sometimes you feel lost, and everyone have that, and we can share that. That's, I think, it's really important point. Not just a member, but something really warm,